February 1944. High above northern Germany, the sky was burning. At 22,000 feet, a formation of silver specks pierced the thin winter light. American B-17s, engines groaning under full power, bound for the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. Their vapor trails carved white scars through the pale blue expanse. Below and behind them, a lone Messerschmitt Bf-109 sliced upward through the haze. Its pilot, a decorated Luftwaffe ace with over 100 victories, steadied his breathing. He had done this countless times before. The rhythmic growl of his Daimler-Benz engine felt almost reassuring, like the heartbeat of an old friend. He smiled as he spotted the rearmost bomber. The angles were perfect, the sun at his back. He rolled inverted, dove, and squeezed the trigger. Then, through the shimmer of gunsmoke, he saw them, glints of light from every direction. Dozens, maybe more. Mustangs. The ace's smile froze. The radio crackled with frantic warnings he could barely hear over the roar of his dive. The odds had changed, 10-1. The hunter had become the hunted, and with that moment, the Luftwaffe's age of mastery began to die in the cold sky above Europe. In 1919, Germany's skies fell silent. Under the Treaty of Versailles, the defeated nation was forbidden to possess an air force. Hangars stood empty. Factories rusted. The great pilots of the Imperial German Air Service, men who once ruled the clouds in their Fokker triplanes, were grounded, stripped of wings and pride. But humiliation has a long memory. In the 1920s, inside flying clubs disguised as civilian schools, young Germans began to train again, illegally, secretly. The names of towns like Lipetsk in Soviet Russia became code for reawakening. There, in remote hangars, German engineers and pilots tested new engines, practiced formation tactics, and prepared for a future no one dared to speak of. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, he found a nation already restless for the sky. He gave it wings. Within months, the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the Air Ministry, was born under the command of Hermann Göring, a former ace himself. In public, the regime spoke of civil aviation. In reality, the most ambitious rearmament program in history had begun. Junkers, Heinkel, and Messerschmitt factories roared back to life. Designs once hidden in backrooms became instruments of power. The sleek Bf-109, the fast He-111, the rugged Ju-87 Stuka. The world watched in silence. By 1935, the Luftwaffe was officially unveiled. Modern, disciplined, and already the most advanced air arm in Europe. Training mirrored industrial precision. Cadets learned not just to fly but to think tactically, to attack from altitude, to strike with speed, to vanish before the enemy could react. Every maneuver, every loop, every dive was practiced until instinct replaced fear. By the time the Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936, the Luftwaffe saw its chance for a dress rehearsal. The Condor Legion, a volunteer force, tested Germany's new aircraft in real combat. The skies over Guernica became a proving ground for modern air warfare. Dive bombers screamed down on civilian targets, and the world saw it for the first time, the terrifying precision of blitzkrieg from above. The results were conclusive. The Luftwaffe had not just caught up with the world, it had surpassed it. When war came in September 1939, German bombers crossed the Polish frontier with devastating speed. The Luftwaffe's doctrine was clear: annihilate the enemy's air force first, then crush resistance on the ground. In Poland, the tactic worked flawlessly. Within days, Polish squadrons were wiped out, their airfields cratered. In Norway, Denmark, and the Low Countries, the same pattern repeated. The German war machine moved like a storm, ground and air perfectly synchronized. But it was France, May 1940, that marked the height of the Luftwaffe's power. As panzer divisions raced through the Ardennes, waves of Stukas cleared the roads ahead. British and French units disintegrated under relentless assault. Communication lines burned. Bridges vanished in thunder and dust. To the German people, it seemed the Luftwaffe could not be stopped. Newspapers called its pilots the Knights of the Air. Children collected models of Messerschmitts. Propaganda films showed them laughing in crisp uniforms, heroes above the clouds. Yet beneath that polished image, a quiet arrogance was forming, one that would soon collide with the reality of industrial war. Because across the Channel, a very different kind of air force was preparing to fight, one built not on speed or prestige, but on endurance. And the day would come when the hunters of 1940 would find themselves outnumbered, outproduced, and outflown. The summer of 1940 began with confidence and ended with disbelief. When France fell, Hitler turned his gaze toward Britain. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion, required one thing above all: control of the skies. If the Luftwaffe could destroy the Royal Air Force, Britain would fall without a single soldier landing on its beaches. On August 13th, Adlertag, Eagle Day, the campaign began. Hundreds of bombers and fighters rose from airfields across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The plan was simple: draw out the RAF, crush it, and bomb England into submission. But the Luftwaffe was stepping into a new kind of war. The British home defense network was unlike anything the Germans had faced. Along the coasts, an invisible barrier watched the skies, the chain-home radar system. Linked to control rooms, plotting every incoming raid, it allowed the RAF to launch fighters only when and where they were needed. For the first time, numerical superiority meant nothing. Speed and coordination did. The Battle of Britain raged for months. Messerschmitts escorted bombers deep into enemy territory, but their fuel limited them to mere minutes of combat over southern England. British Spitfires and Hurricanes, lighter and more agile, struck in concentrated bursts before diving back into friendly fields. Losses mounted. Pilots, once seen as symbols of invincibility, now returned exhausted, or didn't return at all. By October 1940, Hitler postponed the invasion. Göring's boast of crushing the RAF had failed. The myth of Luftwaffe invincibility cracked for the first time, yet the skies of Europe were far from quiet. In 1941, the war expanded eastward. Operation Barbarossa opened a front unlike any before: vast, endless, merciless. At first, German air power reigned supreme once again. Soviet airfields burned by the hundreds. Red Air Force pilots fell from the sky in flames. But the scale of the front was staggering, from the Baltic to the Black Sea, and every victory consumed more fuel, more men, more machines. By the winter of 1941, the Luftwaffe was stretched thin. Maintenance crews froze on makeshift runways. Supply lines collapsed in the snow. Aircraft that once dominated the skies now sat grounded for lack of fuel or spare parts. The turning point, however, would come not in Russia, but in the skies of Western Europe. By 1942, Britain had recovered. Its factories were working at full capacity. The United States had entered the war. Together, the Allies began what Germany had feared most: a campaign of relentless industrial retaliation. From 1943 onward, waves of American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators crossed the North Sea daily, escorted by ever-improving fighters. Each raid forced the Luftwaffe to defend multiple fronts simultaneously: France, the Ruhr, Berlin, and beyond. The German fighter force, once a precision instrument, was now a blunt shield. Losses skyrocketed, experienced aces were replaced by barely trained recruits, and above all, the balance of production had shifted beyond recovery. Where the Reich could produce a few hundred aircraft a month, the Allies were building thousands. Engines, fuel, pilots, every figure tilted against Germany. The Luftwaffe, once the hammer of blitzkrieg, was now defending its own cities. Airfields that once launched offensives were bombed daily. The hunted had become the hunted again, only now there was nowhere to run. By early 1944, the writing was on the wall. German skies swarmed with Allied bombers. The long-range P-51 Mustang, equipped with drop tanks, could now escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. For Luftwaffe pilots, survival became a matter of luck, and it was in this crucible, the dying months of German air power, that one ace, high above the clouds, would realize the full weight of that change. His smile, once the symbol of domination, would vanish beneath a sky filled with enemies. The human angle. The ace and his Sky 2 understand the moment that smile froze. One must understand what it meant to be a Luftwaffe ace. They were not soldiers in trenches nor strategists behind maps. They lived in the thin blue world above, where a man's life could be measured in seconds and instinct. By 1944, these pilots carried a weight far greater than victory or defeat. They carried a myth. Men like Erich Hartmann, Gerhard Barkhorn, Walter Nowotny, and Adolf Galland had become symbols of an empire's confidence. Their portraits filled newspapers. Their kills were tallied like sports scores, yet beneath that image lay exhaustion. Many had been flying since 1939, without rotation, without rest. The Luftwaffe system rewarded experience but never replenished it. When a veteran fell, decades of training fell with him. The ace in our story, anonymous but representative, was the embodiment of that paradox. Young, skilled, confident, but utterly alone in the end. He flew not for ideology, but for survival, defending a homeland now under siege. Each sortie was a repetition of the same ritual: climb, hunt, evade, land, grieve. When he smiled before diving at those bombers, it wasn't arrogance. It was memory, the echo of a time when the Luftwaffe ruled the air. And when the swarm of Mustangs appeared, it was not just a tactical shock. It was the collapse of everything he had been trained to believe. The sky that had once belonged to him no longer recognized his kind. The tactical angle, from hunter to hunted immeusi. Tactics that once defined Luftwaffe success had turned against them. In 1939 and 1940, German fighter doctrine centered on freie Jagd, the free hunt. Pairs of aircraft roamed ahead of bombers, intercepting enemies before they could attack. This flexibility, combined with superb training, gave German pilots an edge over more rigid Allied formations. But by 1943, the battlefield had evolved. The Allies flew in massive layered formations. Dozens of bombers flew in box patterns that allowed crossfire coverage from every direction. The Luftwaffe's elegant maneuvers now met walls of 50 caliber fire. German pilots adapted with desperation. Attacks shifted to head-on approaches, a suicidal tactic that offered only seconds to fire before collision. The Luftwaffe's new aircraft, the FW-190A and Bf-109G, were powerful but limited by fuel and altitude. Climbing to meet bombers at 25,000 feet drained their engines before combat even began. Meanwhile, the Americans introduced their own revolution: long-range escort fighters. The P-47 Thunderbolt came first, heavy and rugged, followed by the P-51 Mustang, fast, high-flying, and deadly. Now the bombers no longer flew alone. German aces, used to swooping in unchallenged, found themselves ambushed mid-climb. Dogfights erupted miles from the bomber stream, high above frozen farmland where contrails twisted like ghosts. Each engagement cost the Luftwaffe men it could not replace. Fuel shortages restricted training. Green recruits barely knew how to navigate, let alone fight. The hunter had lost control of the hunt. Every new sortie became a test of endurance, not of skill, but of will. And through that exhaustion, one realization spread among the surviving aces: the war in the air was no longer theirs to win. The technological angle, the machines that changed everything in the Second World War. Technology was not just a tool, it was destiny. When the Luftwaffe was born, its aircraft embodied modernity. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, designed by Willy Messerschmitt in the mid-1930s, was sleek, fast, and deadly. Its monoplane design, retractable landing gear, and fuel-injected engine made it one of the most advanced fighters of its time. But by 1943, it was aging. The Allies, fueled by American industry, brought a new generation of machines. The P-51 Mustang represented a leap in design philosophy: aerodynamic efficiency, laminar flow wings, and a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that could sustain power at extreme altitudes. It was not only faster than the Bf-109, it could fly farther, fight longer, and escort bombers deep into enemy territory. Radar, too, transformed the battlefield. What had once been an invisible domain of surprise became a monitored grid. Allied controllers could track raids, vector fighters, and coordinate counterattacks across hundreds of miles. The Luftwaffe's own innovations, the Me-262 jet, advanced rockets, radar-guided night fighters, came too late. Prototypes sat idle for lack of fuel, pilots, or priority. While Germany's scientists reached for the future, its air force was trapped in the past. The sky that had once been a laboratory of German innovation was now dominated by Allied efficiency. And at the heart of it, every pilot, when from ace to recruit, felt that shift in the vibration of the cockpit, in the thinness of the air, in the silence of the radio when help no longer came. The leadership angle, pride before the fall in the beginning. Hermann Göring was adored, the hero of the First World War, recipient of the Pour le Mérite, and Hitler's chosen commander of the Luftwaffe. He embodied the ideal of the air warrior, charismatic, flamboyant, confident. To many Germans, Göring was the face of victory in 1939, but by 1943, his image had curdled. As Allied bombers darkened the skies over German cities, Göring's boasts began to sound hollow. He had once promised the Führer that no enemy bomber would ever reach the Ruhr. By 1943, the Ruhr was rubble. The Luftwaffe's leadership had failed to evolve. Its early successes had bred complacency. Strategic bombing had been underestimated. Radar and jet development had been delayed or mired in politics. Göring's inner circle, the yes-men culture of the Nazi command, shielded him from reality. Field commanders were left improvising defenses against overwhelming odds with dwindling resources. Even the best aces, men like Adolf Galland, who openly criticized Göring's decisions, found themselves sidelined. Galland famously told him, "Herr Reichsmarschall, give me a squadron of Spitfires and I'll show you what we can do." The line was insubordinate, but true. By 1944, command had lost the trust of the cockpit. The Luftwaffe's spirit fractured not under enemy fire, but under its own weight of denial. And while Göring's silk uniforms glittered at parades, his pilots flew into battles they could no longer win. The strategic angle, the impossible war Germany had built an air force for short wars, not for endurance. The Blitzkrieg strategy depended on surprise, precision, and swift victory. The Luftwaffe was optimized to support ground forces, not to sustain long-term strategic bombing or defense against it. When the war expanded into a global industrial contest, Germany's system buckled. By 1943, the Allies had something the Reich could never match: scale. American factories in Detroit and California produced aircraft around the clock. British refineries fed an endless stream of aviation fuel. Women, teenagers, and immigrants manned the assembly lines. Germany, blockaded and bombed, could not keep up. Aluminum was scarce. Synthetic fuel plants were targeted relentlessly. Each Allied bombing campaign was more than destruction. It was attrition by arithmetic. For every Luftwaffe aircraft shot down, it took weeks to replace. For every bomber the Germans destroyed, 5 more arrived from the United States. Strategic logic had turned upside down. The Reich's technological brilliance was trapped within a collapsing economy. The Luftwaffe still fought with skill and courage, but courage no longer mattered when the enemy could afford to lose more. Every day, new squadrons filled the sky from the west. Every night, more cities burned. It was not a question of if Germany would lose the air war, only when. The moral angle, shadows over honor. For many Luftwaffe pilots, the war began in glory and ended in silence. They had grown up in a nation that worshipped the sky, where flight was purity, heroism, transcendence. They had believed, at least at first, that they were fighting for Germany, not ideology. But as the war dragged on, that illusion disintegrated. By 1944, entire cities, Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, had been turned to ash. The men who once saw themselves as knights of the air were now witnesses to total war. Their skill and precision could no longer protect their homeland, their families, or even their code of honor. In the final years, Luftwaffe pilots were often sent on suicide missions, outnumbered, outgunned, out of fuel. Some were barely 20 years old, with just a few hours of flight time. To die was not bravery anymore. It was routine, and for those who survived, the guilt was unbearable. They had watched comrades burn, civilians perish, and the ideals of their profession dissolve into propaganda. Even the most decorated aces understood the truth by then. No matter how well they flew, they were fighting gravity itself, the gravity of numbers, of industry, of fate. The smile of the Luftwaffe ace before his last dive was not arrogance nor courage. It was denial, a fleeting echo of a war already lost. As he faced 10-to-1 odds, he was not just outnumbered. He was out of time. February 20th, 1944. Dawn broke over the Reich like a cold blade. Frost clung to the tarmac of airfields scattered across central Germany, Leipheim, Augsburg, and Braunschweig. Mechanics moved in silence beneath the skeletal frames of Messerschmitts, their breath visible in the freezing air. Fuel was scarce, ammunition limited, and the men exhausted, yet orders were clear. Allied bombers were inbound. Operation Argument, what the Allies called Big Week, had begun. Across Western Europe, the skies vibrated with the sound of engines. Over 2,000 American bombers, escorted by nearly 900 fighters, streamed eastward toward the industrial heart of Germany. Their targets were not cities this time, but factories, the very lifeblood of the Luftwaffe. At 10:15 a.m., radar stations confirmed the inevitable. Multiple formations crossing the Rhine. The alarm sounded. Pilots raced to their aircraft, among them a veteran ace, the kind who no longer counted his kills, only his friends who were gone. He climbed into his Bf 109 G6, adjusted his oxygen mask, and waited for clearance. Schwarm eins. Bereitsam Start. Flight 1 cleared for takeoff. The roar of Daimler-Benz engines shattered the stillness. The fighters lifted off one by one, their shadows stretching across the white fields below. At 20,000 feet, contrails laced the sky like veins. The ace scanned the horizon, then saw them. A formation of silver bombers, sunlight flashing off their fuselages, flying in tight box formations. They were coming for the Messerschmitt plants at Regensburg and Augsburg, where Germany's next generation of fighters, including the Me-262 jet, were being built. Every pilot knew what that meant. If those factories fell, so would the Luftwaffe. The order came through. Intercept at altitude. Prioritize bombers. The ace pushed his throttle forward. The aircraft trembled under acceleration. He climbed into the sun, positioning himself above the bomber stream, the perfect attack vector. His gun sight aligned with the lead B-17. He held his breath and dove. Tracer fire lit the air like falling stars. The sky became a machine of chaos. Engines screaming, shells bursting, vapor trails spiraling like smoke from burning paper. He scored a hit. One bomber lurched out of formation, smoke pouring from its right wing. For a moment, the old rhythm returned. Precision, instinct, control. Then the escort arrived. From the east, dots appeared. First a few, then dozens. Sleek, silver, impossibly fast. The P-51 Mustangs, they dropped into the fight like hawks. 50 caliber fire ripped through the formation. Feindjäger, viele. Enemy fighters, many. The radio dissolved into panic. The ace broke hard left, the G-forces crushing his chest. His wingman was gone, a flash of flame and debris spiraling earthward. He tried to climb, but the Mustangs were everywhere. Their range, their altitude, their speed. It was as if the air itself had turned against him. He banked toward the sun again, searching for an opening. The Bf 109 shuddered, warning lights flickering. In seconds, he saw what every Luftwaffe pilot feared. Tracer lines converging on his tail. He rolled, dove, and fired back. But the sky was too full. 10-1, the ace had once laughed at such odds. Now they were real. A burst struck his left wing. The aircraft lurched violently. Smoke filled the cockpit. He coughed, vision blurring, heartbeat hammering in his ears. He jettisoned his canopy and reached for the parachute. As he fell, the world below was burning. The horizon was filled with smoke plumes, factories, towns, forests. Allied bombers continued on, unstoppable, like a tide of steel. Below him, the field that once trained Germany's best was now a graveyard of wreckage. That day alone, the Luftwaffe lost over 350 fighters. Most were flown by veterans who would never return. Big Week broke the back of German air defense. And for those who survived, it marked the moment when the war's end could be seen. Not on the ground, but in the sky. The spring of 1944 brought no recovery. In the weeks after Big Week, the Luftwaffe tried to rebuild, But there was nothing left to rebuild with. Fuel depots were smoking craters. Ball-bearing plants lay in ruins. Aircraft production dropped by almost half, and every new pilot sent into the air was younger, less trained, and more afraid. Yet the orders from Berlin were unrelenting. Defend the Reich at all costs. By May, the Allies owned the skies. From sunrise to dusk, formations of bombers roared across the continent like clockwork. Cities like Brunswick, Kassel, and Munich were bombed into dust. Railways were shattered. The Luftwaffe's network of airfields was now visible from space, a grid of bomb craters and burnt wrecks. Even the ace who had survived Big Week felt it, the shift from battle to endurance. Every mission was the same: take off under fire, climb into the contrails, see nothing but enemies, and pray the fuel held long enough to return. Then came June 6, 1944. D-Day. At dawn, the western horizon glowed with gunfire. 5,000 ships crossed the English Channel. Above them, an armada of over 12,000 Allied aircraft, fighters, bombers, transports, filled the sky. The invasion of France had begun. The Luftwaffe's contribution to that day was almost symbolic. Out of an entire air force that once numbered thousands, fewer than 300 German fighters could be scrambled against the invasion fleet. Most were destroyed before they even reached the beaches. Over Normandy, the imbalance was absolute. P-51s, P-47s, and Typhoons ruled the sky, strafing every road, bridge, and convoy. German armored divisions trying to reach the coast were torn apart from above. Tanks burned before they ever saw the enemy. For the Luftwaffe pilots who took off that morning, it was not combat. It was survival. One report from a German air command near Caen recorded the radio chatter that morning. Feind überall. Wir sind zu wenige. Enemy everywhere. We are too few. By nightfall, the invasion beaches were secure. The Reichsmarschall, Göring, issued furious orders from his headquarters, demanding counterattacks that could no longer be made. His voice was still loud, but the air he commanded was silent. In the following weeks, Allied air supremacy became complete. Every German movement by day was visible, and therefore vulnerable. Every train, truck, and convoy was hunted from above. The Luftwaffe tried new tactics: night interceptors, rocket-propelled fighters, even desperate suicide attacks known as Rammjäger. But these were not strategies. They were symptoms of defeat. The ace, once proud of his precision, now flew missions that barely lasted 10 minutes. Fuel reserves were so low that some aircraft launched with half tanks, gambling that they'd find a target before running dry. He had seen the faces of his new wingmen, boys of 16, trembling in cockpits they barely understood. He had seen their aircraft burst into flame minutes after takeoff. By July 1944, Germany had lost its last real weapon: time. The Allied advance from Normandy pushed eastward, and with every mile gained on the ground, the Luftwaffe's world grew smaller. Airfields were overrun, hangars abandoned, aircraft destroyed where they stood. The sky, once the symbol of Germany's strength, was now Allied territory. That summer, reports showed Germany losing 1,000 aircraft per month. Fuel production dropped by 80%. Entire squadrons were erased from the roster, and somewhere over France, another dogfight ended the same way. A lone Bf-109 spiraling through black smoke, the pilot ejecting too late. No one knew his name. No one counted his final kill. Only the numbers remained, cold, mechanical, and absolute. By autumn, the Luftwaffe existed in name only. Its few surviving aces fought on, not for victory but for honor, or perhaps just habit. The hunter's sky had become a graveyard of contrails and silence, and from that silence would rise the final reckoning. The aftermath of a war the Luftwaffe could no longer fight. The airfields of Germany were quiet now. By late 1944, what had once been a symphony of engines was reduced to silence and smoke. The Luftwaffe, once the most formidable air force in the world, was shattered. Its strength had collapsed from over 3,000 operational aircraft in 1940 to fewer than 800 by the end of 1944. Most were grounded for lack of fuel. The Luftwaffe's great aces, men who had once been symbols of invincibility, were either dead, captured, or training young recruits who would never survive their first missions. Germany's industrial heart had been methodically dismantled from the sky. The Allied combined bomber offensive had succeeded in its grim arithmetic. Factories at Regensburg, Schweinfurt, and Kassel, centers of aircraft and ball-bearing production, lay in ruins. Synthetic fuel plants at Leuna and Pölitz burned night after night, crippling the Luftwaffe's last reserves. By January 1945, even the most elite units were rationed to a few gallons per sortie. Many pilots never made it into combat. They ran out of fuel during takeoff or landing. Maintenance crews scavenged wrecks for usable parts. Airfields were bombed faster than they could be repaired. The men who still flew did so knowing their odds were gone. The once proud Jagdgeschwader 52, home to legends like Erich Hartmann and Gerhard Barkhorn, continued to fight in the east, where the Red Air Force advanced relentlessly. Their kills numbered in the hundreds, but their efforts could no longer change the war's direction. Hartmann himself, the highest-scoring ace in history with 352 victories, flew until the final days of the Reich. His words years later reflected the futility of that time. We flew not for victory, but for survival. The end was written in the sky. Meanwhile, the Allied offensive became unstoppable. By early 1945, the skies over the Reich were an unbroken tide of Allied power. Waves of B-17s and Lancasters by day, Mosquitoes and Halifaxes by night. Entire cities vanished under the weight of tonnage. Dresden, Pforzheim, Hamburg, Berlin. Every raid that once filled Luftwaffe pilots with resolve now filled them with dread. Even the revolutionary Me-262 jet fighter, Hitler's long-promised miracle weapon, arrived too late. It was faster than any Allied aircraft, capable of outrunning even the P-51. But production delays, pilot shortages, and Hitler's interference crippled its potential. He ordered it to be used as a bomber rather than an interceptor. The result? Scattered units, misused resources, and wasted opportunity. The Luftwaffe had been built on the principle of mastery, Luftüberlegenheit, air superiority. Now it existed only in fragments, its mastery reduced to memory. On the ground, civilians learned to read the sound of engines, to know friend from foe by the pitch of the sky. Mothers and children hid in basements as the thunder of Allied bombers rolled across the horizon. The skies, once a symbol of modernity and hope, had become the instrument of ruin. And still Goering remained at his headquarters in Karenhall, surrounded by uniforms and medals, clinging to illusions of control. He blamed his subordinates, then the weather, then the factories. But the truth was simpler. The Luftwaffe had been beaten by mathematics, industry, and time. By April 1945, when Soviet tanks entered Berlin, the air above was Allied territory. The Luftwaffe, the pride of Nazi Germany, ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Its last operational squadron surrendered days before Hitler's suicide. Many pilots destroyed their own aircraft to prevent capture. Others simply walked away from their airfields and never returned. In less than a decade, the Luftwaffe had risen, conquered, and disintegrated, undone not by courage or will, but by the limits of human ambition. The ace who, once smiled before his dive, had become a ghost in the machinery of war, one of thousands lost in a sky that no longer remembered their names. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the Luftwaffe was gone, not defeated in the field, but erased from history by exhaustion. Across the ruins of Europe, Allied forces catalogued the remnants of the once great air arm. Crumpled wings lay in open fields. Abandoned airfields stretched across the plains of Germany like scars. In hangars near Munich and Stuttgart, engineers walked through the skeletons of half-finished jets and rocket interceptors, fragments of a future that had never arrived. The Allied occupation began with efficiency. Pilots were interrogated, factories seized, research confiscated. Operation Lusty, the U.S. Army Air Force's mission to capture German aviation technology, stripped the Reich of its scientific secrets. Entire teams of German engineers were transported to America and Britain, their expertise fueling the next generation of aircraft and missile programs. Among them were men who had designed the Me-262, the V-2, and the He-162, innovations born in desperation, now feeding the Cold War. But for the pilots who had fought and survived, the end brought no triumph, no welcome home. Many were captured and sent to POW camps in the East and West. Others, like Erich Hartmann, were handed over to the Soviets, enduring years of imprisonment. Hartmann would spend a decade in labor camps before returning to a divided Germany in 1955. When he did, he found a world that no longer spoke of heroism. Germany had changed. The Luftwaffe's once glorious name was a stain, synonymous not with chivalry but with the destruction of Europe. The survivors, many still young men, faced the unbearable question: what had all their skill, all their sacrifice achieved? The answer lay in the ruins. For the civilians who had lived beneath the bombers in London, Hamburg, Dresden, Warsaw, the sky itself had become a reminder of terror. For the soldiers who had fought below, air superiority had been both a weapon and a warning. The modern world would never again know war without the roar of engines overhead. The post-war trials reflected that shift in morality. At Nuremberg, Goering stood in the dock, still defiant, still draped in faded pride. He denied responsibility for terror bombings, claiming he had fought honorably. But history saw otherwise. He was sentenced to death, choosing suicide over execution. With him died the last voice of the Luftwaffe's founding myth. Yet even in disgrace, the technological and tactical lessons of the Luftwaffe endured. Its early doctrines of close air support, radar-guided control, and formation flying became the foundation of modern air warfare. Its failures, arrogance, centralization, and underestimation of industry became warnings etched into the manuals of every future air force. By the 1950s, a new German air force, the Bundesluftwaffe, emerged under NATO supervision. It bore the same name but not the same soul. Its mission was defense, not conquest. Its pilots flew under a democratic flag, trained by the very nations that once destroyed their predecessors. In this paradox, the memory of the old Luftwaffe faded quietly. Its survivors rarely spoke publicly. Those who did, like Galland and Steinhoff, wrote memoirs not of glory, but of loss, of men sacrificed to leadership blindness and the machine of ideology. They described the end of their world in simple, factual sentences. No dramatics, no excuses, just the truth of what it meant to watch the sky turn against them. For them, the war never ended in surrender. It ended in understanding. The Luftwaffe had been a marvel of technology and daring, but it had flown on false wings, built on ambition that outpaced humanity. In the final years, it was not courage that failed, but reason. And as the wreckage of their aircraft rusted in empty fields, the surviving aces looked upward one last time, to the same cold sky they once commanded, and saw not victory or defeat, but silence. The silence of an empire that thought it could own the air. The skies over Europe are quiet now. The contrails have faded. The engines that once defined an age lie rusting in forgotten fields. But if you stand on one of those runways, concrete cracked, grass reclaiming the edges, you can almost hear it still. The faint hum of a distant engine, the whisper of history. The story of the Luftwaffe is not merely the story of an air force. It is the story of human ambition colliding with reality. In its rise lay genius, the rebirth of flight, innovation at a pace the world had never seen. In its fall lay warning that no technology, no courage, and no belief in superiority can defy the weight of truth. The men who flew for the Luftwaffe were not all monsters, nor all heroes. They were products of a world that demanded absolutes, victory or death, pride or surrender. They soared higher than any generation before them, only to watch the world they fought for crumble beneath them. In the end, they learned what the machines could not. That mastery of the air means nothing if humanity is lost on the ground. The ace who once smiled before diving into combat became a symbol of something larger, the fragility of power, the illusion of control. For one brief moment he had ruled the sky. Then, surrounded by 10 enemies, he realized the truth. The age of the hunter was over. History remembers him not by name, but by meaning. His story, and that of the Luftwaffe, endures as both marvel and caution. For in every age, nations still build faster aircraft, smarter weapons, stronger empires. Yet the sky remains the same, vast, indifferent, eternal. The Luftwaffe rose to claim it, and in doing so, proved that no one ever truly can.